Hello everyone, welcome to Policy Central, your one-stop destination for all things policy. Of late, we've been talking about how monsoons are not really monsoons, summers are extremely hot, and then every other day, we're hitting a whole new record when it comes to weather and climate and temperature. Bangalore weathers, as of now, are unpredictable. Either I wake up to sunny mornings where I want a nice fresh glass of orange juice, or it's so cold that I almost thrive on filter coffee. But climate change is real, or is it really real? We have everyone talking about climate change, environment, we need to say plant more trees. But what is the reality of it? So Arya is here with me. She's my classmate, and I want to know what is her thoughts on climate change. Welcome to Policy Central.
Hi Gayathri.
Hi. It's nice to see you in this setup and not in a classroom. Refreshing. So when I talk about, when you first hear the word climate change, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Climate change, the first word is disaster, rising water levels. All of a sudden it rains and then there's water everywhere and then
we're all flooding and then we're like, we didn't get a cab, we're on the way.
Sorry, today I'll be late for class because the water is not. So yeah, it's more like a disaster, it's more like chaos. We don't know what's happening, but there's a lot of uncertainty around it. So I think what the point that you mentioned, climate change is real. That's really happening. That's happening right in front of us. You can literally see it. So climate change, we need to really focus on why it's happening, how we can reduce it, how to mitigate the effects of climate change are some of the focus areas that we can work upon.
I think we belong to that generation that whose school essays were all about what is pollution, why is pollution wrong, or what is climate change, right? We always had that, at least for me, English essays, half of the book was just climate change. So
in the environment subject.
And in the environment subject. So climate change has been a part of what we've been growing up with, right? And what are the first things that you notice about climate change? I mean, of course, the weather, the whole title itself, climate change, but certain practices or things in daily life that talk about climate change to you.
So I think, as personally at least, when we're growing up, we always knew there's something that's happening in the environment, but we really did not do climate change as such. This has gained more momentum recently. In the sense, when we started seeing, things that we started experiencing it. I think we really will have an effect only when we start experiencing it. That's something happening somewhere. But now, actually, I think once we started feeling the impact of climate change, when we started to experience floods, when we started to experience rising temperatures over a long period of time, that's when we realized, climate change is real, that's something that's happening. So that's when I think governments across the world, or government of India, or state governments started really working on it, start bringing about a lot of policies. There are a lot of committees, organizations that start working on climate change as such.
So since you spoke about governments, who do you think really contributes to the issues of climate change? And we were discussing earlier, right, climate change is not just one issue. There's so many things contributing. You have floods, and then you have famines and droughts happening at the same time. So who, country wise or the kind of demography wise, who do you think really contributes to climate change?
I think we all know who the major culprit is. But yeah, we know who it is. It's a known fact that it is US being one of the largest. Of course, China is also another major emitter, and India.
Of course, India. But ours is purely due to population.
And it's inevitable for us, considering we are in the path of industrialization. We missed it in the past, so we are still on the path of industrialization. I think we will contribute. Let's accept that fact. Let's not deny it. We cannot contribute, or we are contributing, and that's a fact. So in terms of who contributes majorly, it's US. It's recent, and of course there are a lot of this $100 billion fund that they wanted to create.
The climate finance.
Yeah, and developed countries, I think they have failed. They haven't really delivered it.
Actually, and that's a very interesting point, right? Because also with the Paris Agreement, I think the whole contention was also that developed countries were refusing to take the ownership for the damage that they have caused.
The debate of developed versus developed. Who has to take the responsibility?
Not us. But again, because you look consumption-wise or population-wise, Asian countries like China and India are in the forefront. But when you look at consumption wise per head, US is a contender. I'm not denying China is not a contender, but again, if you look towards the West and the Eastern Bloc, US is one of the major contributors that way. And the largest, contribution to climate change is probably from the energy sector.
Yeah.
That is your fuels or electricity, anything.
Absolutely.
And our consumptions are only going to increase since we hit the 8 billion mark, right? And do you think that developing countries, like you said, the developed versus the developing countries, do you think developing countries should actually take a more proactive stance when it comes to climate change? Like what is done is done.
Yeah.
Now you can't really reverse it, or you can't like get the developed countries to the knees and be like apologize for it. But when you look at action plans, do you think we should take this as a leadership moment and cover up for what is being done?
I think we are already on the path of doing that, because at least for India, we have taken so many major steps in combating climate change. By reducing the carbon emissions, or by relying more on renewable sources of energy, by adopting like policies like FAME, where we adopt e-technology and everything. But definitely we are taking steps in that, and we are using energy, the climate change as a soft power also, in terms of one world, one sun, one grid, or be it there is like something lifestyle for sustainable environment and all these. We are adopting certain measures. We are trying to use that as soft power. We are bringing in a lot of measures. But however, developing countries alone cannot do it.
Okay.
Developed and developing countries should work hand in hand to combat climate change. And I think the entire blame game of you do it or I do it, it does not work that way.
Also, not to play exactly the devil's advocate, but don't you think the whole idea of us trying to take a more proactive stance on combating climate change is unfair, because the other countries got their opportunity to actually exploit all the resources and establish themselves, like in terms of an economy or as a country, their strength, the trade strength, right? And the main contention with like our struggle with climate change is also that it will weaken or slow down our economic progress to a certain extent, because even if it's transition to renewable energy for that matter. So just because climate change is bad, should we compromise on our growth? In the sense, like if the West got their chance, or the other countries like China got their chance in the industrialization and everything, but there are harmful effects of it. We do need to learn from their experience, but that doesn't mean that we cut down on our growth, right? Like we are polluting, that's all we can do. I mean, we're sorry for it. Can we be unapologetic about it?
See, the problem is, who is suffering now? That's the biggest question here. Like, somebody did in the past, yes, of course. But at the end of the day, are we suffering? Yes.
Yeah, we are all.
And definitely something we need to work upon. Because India, definitely, in terms of the number of, as we discussed earlier, floods and rising sea levels, like land, like people whose houses are getting completely submerged in water, and that's happening. So I think, to a certain extent, maybe we do not take the entire responsibility, but we will have to work on combating climate change.
Is this like an opportunity for us, like India as a country, to shine in the global platform? Because the US government is still, definitely after Biden has come onto power and after he's taken on presidency, he did put up statements for climate change and being like US will do an active partnership. But they lost out on 4 years from that Paris Agreement. And by then the world has already changed and there are new alliances being built, right? There's so many countries that have found like partnerships when it comes to energy projects or even combating disaster management and all of that, which US has lost out on. So there is one scope for us to be a leader on the global platform, right?
As mentioned earlier, I think India, like I know, as of now, it's using climate change as a soft power. Like we are leading our way. We are telling, okay, we can develop. At the same time, we will have to use sustainable methods, sustainable and renewable sources of energy, something that we're really focusing upon. We have schemes like, for example, Ujjwala. Let's take that example. So they are providing LPG cylinders. Those are some ways in which we are trying to combat the impact of climate change, because household air pollution is a thing.
Yeah.
And those are at individual level, we can try to reduce climate change. So that's something we can really work upon. So India as a whole, we are trying to make policies, we are trying to bring in change at the individual level also.
That's something that I wanted to bring upon, that all the targets or agreements, even of COP26, there were about 3 to 4 major agreements, including emissions, coal consumption, planting more trees. So these are all done at a very large scale, like at a broad spectrum umbrella, right? And then when you look at if they're really hitting the targets, it's almost to, like, it's not a huge difference. Like, they've not made a very drastic difference to achieving those goals. So do you think, as much as countries are important to like make these agreements, at a decentralized level we need to start implementing?
Definitely, we will have to start implementing a decentralized level at the individual level, that is citizens, but also the corporates level, if you look at it. Because what 2,000 individuals can contribute towards reducing climate change, actually one industry can reduce, if you look at it that way, in terms of the air pollution, for example, or let's say Ganga.
Yeah.
The sheer number of individuals who are polluting versus the industries that are polluting. If you consider one industry, if you consider one corporate industry that is polluting majorly, we can actually reduce it to a certain extent. If you look at it, the irony of who is sponsoring COP, like the recent COP, where it is Coca-Cola, which is considered to be plastic. Like, they're producing so much of plastic.
Yeah.
And that shows who is sponsoring what, right? Like, if you look at it, like, it's very obvious, come on.
But you can't bite the hand that feeds you, Arya. Like, that's blasphemy. I am not going to be that disloyal. No, but that's true. But again, so one thing that I was wondering is that every project, right, the issue with anything that is coming from a top to down and centralized format is that following up becomes very Kafkaesque, and there's so many people involved, right? And there's so many other vested interests. Like you said, Coca-Cola's sponsoring. We have nothing against Coca-Cola, but just the fact that they have vested interests in it. So obviously the narrative will change accordingly. The way that you monitor the progress, everything will change accordingly. Absolutely. So if you're looking at a very basic level, and definitely corporates, I'm all for it, corporates involving, but I'm talking in a more of a administrative stance in the government way. If local self-governments or your state governments for that matter start implementing these plans, wouldn't it be easier to hit the target later? I mean, eventually you would want to hit the agreements or the target set by 2030, cut down 40% emissions. Because one example that I would like to draw is the coal belt in India, right? Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha. We had a very strong discussion about this earlier, and she's like, I know what you're getting. So these three areas are not just like heavily reliant on coal production, as in mining it, but also for the fact of consuming it, right? And their major point is that we don't have access to electricity. So, or we don't have access to gas, or that is your LPG gases. So it's difficult for us to cook. And when you use things like coal, it gives illumination, that is, it gives light to the house, and also you can cook food there. And it is much more affordable in comparison. And then, we'll take this point first. That when you look at communities like this, won't it be easier if governments take initiative in it in reducing coal consumption, like the state government of Odisha, than having a whole central government planning on it?
First question would be, why exactly are we still reliant on coal?
That is a good question. And I have an answer to it, but yeah, go.
So, see, that's majorly because we're reliant on coal. We really cannot just do away with coal, because that's affordable for us at the end of the day. And for such a big population, of course, we can rely on renewable sources of energy, but coal is a major contributor for our electricity supply or all our energy needs. So, of course, we can decentralize the entire, like, how to combat climate change can be decentralized, because at the end of the day, different states have different impacts of climate change. If you look at the Himalayan states, or if you look at the northeastern states, they tend to have more impact of climate change majorly because the Himalayas, like the snow, it's melting.
The snow
yeah, obviously. So they have more impact. So definitely, I think decentralized planning for climate change is definitely an option that we can consider. And moreover, right now, states are majorly are functioning as an extension of central government, in the sense, of course, for everything they function as extension of central government, but for climate change specifically, all the policies that have in place is majorly an extension of the schemes that's introduced by central government. And states individually as such do not have many schemes to combat climate change.
Which brings me to a question. Does that mean, because they are an extension of the central government schemes, do you think they lack ownership to the scheme? Or like being like the agency conversation comes into being, right? Because, and like I said, you wouldn't want to take credit. I mean, you want to take credit for something that you've done, right? Here you're working on something so vehemently, that is something like climate change brings improvement. You're literally changing a whole system or a lifestyle, like you said, a whole cultural practice that a region is used to, and you're introducing new sustainable practices. But it is seen as an extension of a central government project. Yeah. It is seen as the core idea is from the center, but the state government, and owing to our differences in the country, we probably don't want to take ownership over it. So probably decentralizing the whole idea of climate change, any project related to climate change for that matter, could probably bring in more ownership, the feeling of being associated to that project by the local governments.
Definitely.
Right?
I think decentralization, then within state governments, we need to bring in local self-governments in place. Because that's when, because they know what is the local needs, what are the local problems, like local solutions.
Yeah.
Because then the central government who's sitting at the top telling, okay, these are the possible solutions, and that like there are a lot of solutions that can be brought at the grassroots level. I think we will have to majorly focus on bringing changes in the panchayat level or the municipality level.
Yeah.
That's something we can work on.
Because if you look consumption-wise also, we look at bulk numbers, the like stats. If you look when you look at 40% consumption of coal or 60% consumption of coal, it's a huge number. But like how you talk about statistics related to disasters, injured and the death, like these are numbers when you look in as spreadsheets. But if you look at a very decentralized level, these are actually individual. These are, every person has a story. Every person's reason for consuming coal or reason for consuming something as it's called an uppala, but the cow dung cakes that they used to burn, it does release a lot of greenhouse gases, methane, right? Is very different. So probably tackling it, like you said, at the local self-government level will probably bring in much more effective change in a country like India, because our cultural practices are different, right? Like how you were just talking about off camera, that some people still believe rice tastes good because it's cooked on a wooden stove.
We have statistics to prove that.
I mean, and we do know people, right, in our own circle, family circle. If you go back to the hometowns and all that, people would boil water or cook rice on a wooden stove and make everything else in an electric induction stove.
Not just that, they buy wood, like that's the highlight.
Yeah, you have dealers for wood. Like, wow. that really amazes, because this conversation, like we said, is not something very rare. Everyone's talking about climate change, everyone's talking about temperatures rising, dipping, how monsoon months are not monsoon anymore, or it's suddenly raining so much, and then I love do you know the Bangalore meme, right? That morning in Bangalore is so chilly, and then suddenly,
all of a sudden,
yeah, and then it's 10 o'clock, you are just like, why am I even having a sweater on? And then 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's so warm. 4 o'clock, it's suddenly raining.
Exactly, you just look out of the window, it's raining.
So I think when you talk about climate change, it's not anymore like a rare conversation that top level bureaucrats or educated people talk. It's in the sense that it's affecting everyone, and everyone
you can see
knows.
that's happening right in front
Yeah,
of you.
and even lot of, in the urban scenario also, a lot of displacement when it comes to residential purposes happen because of climate change, because you have people who are staying in certain areas now shifting out because it gets frequently flooded. Yeah, migration, that is also a reality, right? So in the Indian scenario, what do you think, apart from coal, like contributes largely to climate change? I like the word climate change so much. Like, it's become the, I think, it's like my takiya kalam now.
But it's just used everywhere, no?
Yeah, it's such a fancy word, and it makes you sound so important all of a sudden. Like,
no, every person has got a command over climate change now. Like, if you look at it, every person.
Listen, getting stuck in the rain when you don't have an umbrella because morning it was warm and sunny is a legit
You thought, okay, it's not a rainy season, let me just not carry
it. an umbrella. Please. That's for the losers. And then suddenly it's raining and you're like, no, it is not supposed to rain. The monsoons were not now. Or like, yeah, it's real. But yeah, what exactly do you think in India, apart from coal consumption, right? Coal is just one part of, that's a rural part of it. But when you talk in the urban scenario, what do you think really contributes to climate change?
Major contribution would be vehicles, like the entire fossil fuel combustion usage of vehicles and everything. We are trying to shift to e-vehicles, but we know what are the various difficulties that we face. We have e-vehicles in place, but we don't have charging stations. So, like, you're expected to charge a vehicle from
you're
home.
Wrong. The charging stations are present, but they're 20 kilometers away when you need it.
So basically, before you leave from home, you're supposed to charge a vehicle. If you forget that day, then you get stuck somewhere.
Such a it's such a Indian thing that whatever you need, you do it at home and you go there. Water, carry it from home. Charge your phone from home. What is a power bank?
Charge your vehicle.
And then now there's a new issue altogether. Charge your vehicle from home and go.
Exactly. But we really don't have the infrastructure for charging vehicles. If you look at it, we don't have infrastructure in place. The same case, like if you're adopting solar energy. But luckily, we have good examples. If you look at Cochin Airport, it's completely reliant on solar energy. That's a good thing.
Yeah, and it's one of the largest projects ever.
Exactly. But on the other hand, if you look at an individual level, is really solar power really, are we using it? We are still reliant on the electricity that just comes to our house. We really do not have solar panels on rooftops and we're not really using electricity. Or we're not able to leverage that extra thing that we have with us. So that's something we'll have to work on. But other than that, in terms of major contributors, I feel one is vehicles and industries, of course. We know that. It's a known thing. Industries, vehicles, and what else? I think... I'm not remembering. There are so many things that...
I think one interesting one was dietary practices.
Oh.
Yeah. So, I see it coming from a vegetarian, it sounds so wrong. But apparently a lot of meat eating leads to a lot of
that's a very debatable topic. But
I'm just thinking, should I even tell it? Because at this one I can see the... because I have very strong meat eating friends. No, but it leads to a lot of release of greenhouse gases. And again, there's another contention that cows also have to contribute to all it, but they are vegetarian and all of that. But see, the thing is, it's time we review our choices in all aspects. I think it comes down to the whole point, like you said, that needs change right now. We're not talking about transportation or people using it for electricity. At an individual level, it's time that we reassess our needs and try to make it more compatible to the goals of a sustainable living or a climate. Because it's as simple as adopting a practice like yoga in the morning because you want to have a peaceful and a long life. Similarly, what is the point of yoga if you're breathing in carbon dioxide, guys? You need fresh air. So for fresh air and more less pollution, you need to have more trees. But if you need to plant more trees, you need to have more spaces and simultaneously reduce the effect of other poisonous gases in the air, which calls for, I think, stricter regulation of industries, and even just when it comes to household release. Garbage disposal is a huge thing if you look that way.
Actually, one point here, now we have these big corporations, big companies and everything. So we tell, okay, you're supposed to reduce emissions and it. But at the end of the day, just think about this. They're sending vehicles to each individual employee's house to pick them from house. Instead of that, can't they rely on buses, like the public transport? So that itself, they're contributing to emissions in a different way. So those are small things I think we can really work upon. Instead of sending vehicles to individual employees' house, let them use public transport. So instead of focusing on big picture, we know big picture is emissions and all these things, we need policies and regulations in place. But there are small things that actually big corporations can work on.
But that will also mean a stronger infrastructure in the public welfare sector, right? Transportation or anything for that matter, because transportation still continues to remain one of the major problem in India. And it's interesting that we still have a lot of bicycle users in the country, and apart from the typical rickshaws and everything. But see, it's a matter of lifestyle upgrade, right? if people have more income, they would definitely want to upgrade to a bike or a car. And now there's so many options in the like available in the country, and when it comes to fuels also, so people would naturally want to upgrade. In that sense, transportation problem would still not be solved unless we call for stricter, now something like a green tax and more stronger it just goes into so many areas simultaneously, right? But it'll still tackle the problem of the emissions to a large extent.
I think behavioral change is what we need to focus upon. Like at the end of the day, at an individual level, it's behavioral change.
I'm struggling to give up on sugar here. We're talking about, no, but which is true, because our major issue also with adopting certain practices were also because that culturally we have like the much argument that I see across when I talk about climate change with foreigners, right? Other foreign students, people who are from another country, they don't get the idea of burning the corpse, which is like the practice, and for us it's the practice in the country, right? The idea of burial is very recent in that sense, or it's very to a very selected community. But the idea of burning a corpse has always been there, which means you do burn fuel, I mean wood with it.
Yeah.
You use other flammable subjects with it. But it's such a core cultural practice, and there is a reduction in it by having more electric incarcinators and everything. But that's again a very small percentage of population who adopts it, not a whole lot. But that also brings into question that how do you tackle India with so much of cultural diversity?
See, that
and climate change.
I think that's more at a policy level, because I think we've already started. Any policy that we bring in has to have majorly three components. One is economic feasibility, political acceptability, and cultural acceptability. So any policies that we are bringing in, I think we need to focus on the cultural acceptability thing majorly. Because as I mentioned earlier, the Ujjwala scheme, we have LPG cylinders that's being given at a very subsidized rate and everything. But at the end of the day, people genuinely believe that food that is cooked using firewood is more tastier. So those are cultural aspects that we really have to work on. So I think that is where our major focus should be to combat climate change at an individual level.
And what is that one probably like area that you would want to tackle with when it comes to climate change? Like what really fascinates you about climate change individually?
At an individual level, I feel, as I mentioned earlier, the bringing in the behavioral change in minds of people is very hard, because that's something that's ingrained in us. We've grown with those things and those misconceptions in mind. So I think climate change, even if we see things that's happening right in front of us, despite that, we are still in a state of denial.
Yeah.
Okay, that's something that will happen. And of course, all these climate change aspects, if you look at it, it's majorly forecast. By 2030, temperature would rise by this level. Or by 2070, we would do something. It's more forecast based. So I think people really forget, okay, something will happen today or tomorrow. Other than those people who are really affected. But generally, if you look at it, we need to tell people, okay, this will happen to you next. So please be careful. Please work on it.
I think we should give them headlines from 2010 or like 2002, which says by 2020. Do you remember when the world was going to end in 2012 or something, and everyone's like, oh, this
Doomsday.
is it. Doomsday. And then suddenly there's like so many, like the pop culture picked it up, right? And there were so many other things like, oh, make your wish, or like top 10 things to do, bucket list and all of that. So probably it's time we start preparing bucket lists like that are a little more doable by the next year, and be like, you know what, if you
don't short-term goals.
short-term, which is, I think, the problem of the global scenario in general, that everyone is given such long-term goals, right? Even if you look at our SDG goals, all 2030, 2050 predictions, and the rate of growth that we are experiencing at this point, and so much uncertainty, like you said. Climate change is so uncertain, and the world is so uncertain. Like a war, we are literally in the middle of a war that started sometime in February or March. So there's so much going on, and so many trade sanctions or disruptions in supply chains. It's time we put bite-sized goals and policies.
Small goals, one step at a time.
One step at a time. And with India, I think the biggest advantage is because we are such a hot mix of cultures and people, demography, like occupation or gender or just mentality wise, that literally we could be used as a sample for any culture around the world. Like, you have such diverse cultures, right? So if a plan is being worked out in one part of this country, a model of that could be replicated somewhere else just because of the similarity to the demography or culture. Case study based, right? So, I mean, climate change that way is really a tacky area to be in, because you just don't have a right way to implement it. We've always been planting trees. We've always been trying to cut down on...
It's based more on predictions.
Everything's on predictions. Everything today thrives on predictions.
Exactly.
It's literally a gamble that you're playing. It's either like you die out of scorching heat or you get frozen in the ice. But how do you survive till that happens?
Exactly.
Right? And how do you make the journey easier? And I think, so one of the major contentions of COP26 was that when we talk about technology in cutting down energy emissions or consumptions for that matter, a lot of the technology does not exist or is not replicable in a large scale.
Exactly.
So what is the whole point of having a target or a goal system when you know it is not replicable in the eventual future, like the near future? So but again, it comes to the question, the rules or the agreement gets as basic as planting trees, planting so many number of trees or setting aside so many fund. What more can you break down the rules to?
See, the problem is we are just laying down the rules there. If you look at, in terms of Compensatory Afforestation Act, if you look at that, we have the companies that cut down the trees have to plant in some other place, they have to plant the trees. But problem is, what kind of trees are being planted? Are they really useful? Are they actually reducing, absorbing the carbon dioxide that's being there? Where exactly it's being planted? It's being cut down in place A and it's being or they're planting it in place B. But is it really useful?
Yeah.
Is it really helping us? It is really helping us. Okay, fine. Here you have cut down the trees. Here you will compensate. It's not compensating at all. And there is a fund that's created again. And that fund, for what it is being used, or actually for a very long time, that fund was not used at all.
Yeah.
So what exactly are we doing with the policy? We have a lot of policies in place. It's not that we have dearth of policies. We have policies in place. The main question is how it's being implemented.
Also, it comes to the fact of calculating the time it takes to reap those benefits, right? That we're talking about cutting down our coal consumptions now by 40%, right? Or say, try to reduce or like slow the temperature degrees by 1.5 degree. Otherwise, we're getting warmer by 2 to 3 degrees every decade, every year. So, I think the rate of seeing that change also is not calculated very well, or we're not foreseeing that very well, because we say we're planting 1 billion trees this year, but you're just literally planting saplings for them to like
grow as a tree
and then probably
reap the benefits
is going to be a while. This is just as basic as a tree, because we're not talking about much technology involved here. But when you equate it with other types of cut down practices, right, it is a long time before we see the benefits. So probably even when we are making short-term goals, we should also probably focus on that our solutions are also something that we can see immediate results with.
Absolutely.
Or something that is easily implementable, people to adopt. Because the minute you say you need to cut down the amount of electricity you use by say 40%, the first thing that probably comes into my mind is that, oh, okay, that means I can't probably charge my laptop full time at home, or I can't use desktop computers. I need to go to something that does not thrive on electricity all day, or probably switch from my geyser to a solar. And to be honest, the issues with solar panel is they're not warm water all the time. Okay.
Exactly. Only if there is sun you get hot water, but otherwise it's not. Like, it's not feasible for us to use all through the year.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is hot, sometimes it's not. So it's not really possible for us to really use it. And moreover, I think what we need to focus on, major problem with climate change is, if you take up any initiative at an individual level, you really cannot see any change. For example, if you look at Swachh Bharat, if you take an example, you clean a particular place, you see that place is clean. But on the other hand, with climate change, you do, but you can't really feel, or you can't really, there's no tangible change that you can actually witness.
Yeah.
So that's something that actually I feel demotivates an individual from doing something.
Which is also the constant irony we discuss in the case of countries like Bhutan, right? That they have they achieved a point where they were net zero when it came to carbon footprint. But they are also facing the brunt of climate change because countries like India, their immediate neighbors like India, China, and then the US and the other countries are exporting their climate change waste. So when it is kind of unfair on them because they are genuinely having practices that reduces carbon footprint, but they do bear the brunt of the whole process in return. And that is also our contention with the other developed countries as well. So I think so to sum it up, if you were to give up a short-term goal for climate change, what would it be? For India, let's just talk about India. And if you want to break it down to another like much more lower level, like a state level or a city level, go ahead with it. But
as we discussed earlier, that would be one step at a time. Instead of telling we need to focus on reducing temperatures, we need to jump to renewable sources of energy, like a lot of things that simultaneously that's happening. Instead of that, I think shifting to renewable sources of energy at smaller levels is a much feasible solution.
Yeah.
See, the adoption of e-vehicles at individual has taken place. If you look at least in Bengaluru, there are a lot of electric vehicles that people are purchasing because we provide them with subsidy.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. So we have to incentivize, we have to bring in policy measures at a very local level, because that way it's easily adoptable to people. And if we bring it at grassroots level from the bottom up approach, wherein the local needs, local problems, local solutions.
Yeah.
So if we focus on that, that's more easy, that's more adoptable to people rather than people at the top saying, okay, we have to reduce the temperature. That's really not adoptable. We'll have to cut it down. How to reduce the temperature at household level. That's something we'll have to focus on. We can bring in modules, we can bring in training, like the small things at individual, probably at Anganwadi level, or probably at corporation level or municipality level is something that we can really work upon.
Okay.
So I think that's a feasible solution.
Yeah, and also I think it'll be easier for us to monitor, because just to add on to it, like one major issue with converting to renewable energies, or for that matter, is a lot of the resources required for renewable energy are expensive.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Either we should have the technology to replicate or produce it at a lower price, or purchase it from countries who provide so.
Affordability and feasibility.
Affordability and feasibility. Oh, the two words that will always haunt any policy.
No, that's actually true. Like, see, e-vehicles we're adopting, but the lithium, the batteries that we have to procure it from outside.
Yeah, and that again is expensive.
Exactly. So how long can you provide subsidy?
Yeah.
Like, we provide for 5 years, 10 years, but after that we cannot provide subsidy for a very long time because it's not sustainable for our Indian exchequer, right? So it's not possible. So I think we need to focus on more reliable and sustainable use within domestically. What we can do is something that we have to think about.
And moving forward, whatever practices or whatever new developments we are having when it comes to even city planning or something as garbage disposal, we should probably start with the point that how do you make it sustainable, how do you make it less pollution like oriented, and how can you make it more environment friendly.
Definitely.
So instead of going with the fact that let's just establish it first and then figure out.
We need a proper plan in place firstly. Like I think that is what the key here is. We need to have a proper plan in place.
Proper plan and try to make it more indigenous.
Yeah.
And not just technology wise or production of it, but like the practice itself should be something that is associated.
And whatever the best practices that we are adopting from other country, I think we should see if it's really feasible in our setup.
Yes. It's not like, I think it's that's the whole thing, right? That we have such diverse cultural practices that we think what has worked for them will work for us, which is not true.
Not true, exactly.
Which is not true. You can't go to a village that barely has electricity for 8 hours a day and be like, you know what, you should probably cut down on your electricity consumption. They have it only for 8 hours. If they don't use it for those 8 hours, when else will they use?
See, we need a proper alternative.
Yeah.
We can't just say, okay, using coal is not good for environment. Yes, we all know that. But what's the feasible and affordable alternative that we have in place?
Yeah.
So that's and large scale production. That's the highlight, because we have that kind of population. So definitely we need to be, we should cater to that kind of population size also. So we need to produce in that extent.
And if you look, we are building a sort of an infrastructure that caters such production, in the sense, in terms of setting up a business unit or a manufacturing unit, we are creating an environment with all these schemes available and talent, India never lacked in talent, and we have people who work. We literally known for our cheap labor at the end of the day. So it's not that we don't have the resources in terms of human resources or an environment that could probably support. It's not the best environment per se, but it's decent enough to start up with such ideas and practices. So moving forward, India could be a leader in climate change.
I mean, I think in terms of being a leader, I think we are already on the path of.
Yeah, because see, the other thing is anything that happens or that affects India, right? At least in the Asian subcontinent, it has an effect everywhere else. If you talk in terms of Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, what if it is bothering India, or if India is taking a step towards it, you can see ripple effect of it. Thanks there. The ripple effects of it in the other countries as well. So this is a good opportunity, and with the G20 leadership as well, now we've taken on the presidency. So it is a good platform. It is a good time for us to leverage that advantage.
Definitely.
So that really makes one wonder that climate change should probably not be restricted to our school essays and debates and be like, I'm going to talk about climate change today. We have to probably start moving from the climate change.
We have to break down it, and we have to know like at what level, like because it's literally at the household level that change can come in, right? So
yeah, what's one practice that you want to adopt for towards climate change? Don't tell me planting trees.
No, I thought you would say minimalism. That's another joke because like honestly, in the name of minimalism, what people are actually doing is like, for example, let's take furniture. They just dispose of whatever the furniture that they have, and they purchase new furniture. The entire idea of minimalism is just gone there.
So one thing that really irks me, right, and I think that's my step towards climate change, the fact that you have these fancy reels that have people buying these a lot of detergent soaps or a lot of these juices and biscuits in bulk, and then they, from the plastic container, they shift it to glass containers or other plastic containers because for aesthetic purposes. Yeah. And it ticks me off because I'm like, you're literally generating more waste. You're not adding to the solution but creating more problems, right? So I think being more aware of our needs
and taking conscious effort.
Yeah.
I think that matters the most. Like in the sense, we have to, like, at least when we're throwing waste, we can, like, if we consciously think about it, we know, okay, in which bin should we put the paper waste or whatever. So that is something, conscious choices, conscious thought that we put for every small act that we do. It will go a long way in combating climate change.
I think that's the best conclusion this video could get. That I mean, every action counts. Because again, like you said, it's not a solitary thing anymore. You can't be like a small state does it and the impact is seen across the country. So let's hope that, and not hope, actually we should really strive on to make it our daily effort and our motto to ensure that we inculcate more practices, more conscious practices towards contributing less to climate change in the sense of harmful effects of climate change, and try to adopt more healthy practices for both the earth and for us. Thank you guys.